マスターとレッシーの地球の生物多様性を回復する最善の方法、スプリームマスターチンハイの討議からの抜粋、全2回の後編、英語の講義です。
30 years ago, my husband and I decided to become vegetarian based on the principle of respect for life and nonviolence. Today, doctors recommend us not to abuse them for health reasons. Additionally, we are finding out that this excessive consumption not only negatively affects human health, but the health of the planet as well. When a hamburger arrives on my table, what does it involve in terms of climate change?
There are a lot of scientific reports made about the cost of meat eating. So I'm sure you are asking for the sake of people who may not be aware. So please allow me to state some of the costs of what we are dealing with for the next time one is about to eat a hamburger. The cost of a hamburger appears to us as cheap, but without the enormous subsidies involved in the meat industry, the real monetary cost of a hamburger would be much higher, at least $12. There are so many costs and resources involved for that one hamburger that you are asking about. From the field to the plate, and all the processes in between. From burning the precious forest to growing the corn and soy to feed the cows, to making the fertilizer and watering these feed crops, to giving the cows huge amounts of healthy land and water. Hormones and antibiotics are also forcefully fed to the cows. And we will eat all that, huh? Then the transport over long distances here and there, and finally to the slaughterhouse. To freezing the meat so that it does not rot as it is supposed to. Then finally it has to be cooked before reaching the plate. And cooked well because, for example, the U.S. Department of Agriculture found that 89% of beef hamburger patties contain traces of the deadly E. coli bacteria. 89%, huh? 89% of the beef hamburger contain trace of E. coli. So there is more that goes in the hamburger than what you think you see. Here are just a few examples. Destruction of land. First, land must be cleared to raise the cows. For one hamburger, there are 55 square feet of destroyed tropical rainforest, which is an equivalent of 75 kilograms of CO2, or driving your car for 5 days straight. Also, biodiversity loss. In the process, we lose up to 30 plant species, 100 insect species, I mean the beneficial one, as well, and dozens of birds, mammals, etc. Now, it contributes to hunger. Some of the deforested land is used to grow grains. Oftentimes, poor families are forced off their land in the process. One hamburger cost 4 pounds of grain that was consumed by the cow. That's about 3 loaves of bread or 8 plates of spaghetti that could have fed a number of hungry people. So, another co-cost of a hamburger is human starvation. Now, we have topsoil loss. For one hamburger, 10 pounds of topsoil for farming are eroded and lost for hundreds of years. A very serious problem. Now, greenhouse gases. Next, one hamburger alone is responsible for greenhouse gas emissions The methane gas emitted for that piece of meat alone weighs approximately 4.7 ounces, but it has the same heat trapping effect as 6.8 pounds of CO2. Because methane is very potent. Water waste. Not only land and food, but water is also required in huge amounts. Just one hamburger costs 625 gallons of clean water, or it would cost you about 45 showers. A month and a half or 2 months without taking a shower for one hamburger alone. Imagine that. On a side note, one cow in his lifetime before slaughter uses enough fresh water to float a large naval ship. Imagine that again. Just one cow. Now we have fossil fuel waste. One hamburger costs thousands of miles of transportation, all the way from the pasture to the feedlot, then all the way to slaughterhouse, and then to the market. So no matter if you try to buy your food locally to save emissions or not, you can't win if you eat meat. There is much more greenhouse gas that goes into this hamburger. In fact, one hamburger uses up 6.5 pounds of fossil fuels, or about a quarter gallon of gasoline. That's over 16 times the amount needed for one full, nutritious vegan meal. Now we have health hazard. There is also the cost in lives. In just one hamburger patty, there are pieces of dozens or sometimes even hundreds of individual cows, all their flesh mixed together. And you are getting more than what you think you're buying. You are buying a health hazard. There is saturated fat, which causes heart disease and stroke. There are also extra things such as growth-inducing hormones, traces of antibiotics that are fed regularly to the poor cows, the actual bacteria that are resistant to those antibiotics. These resistant bacteria are called superbugs. So the added cost here is a multifold risk to our health. There are even more costs after the hamburger is eaten. For example, a woman loses 28 milligrams of calcium after eating just one hamburger, which weakens her bones. And there is a rampant risk of potentially deadly E. coli infection, as beef is a primary source of this bacteria. And again, there are risks of heart disease, cancer, mad cow disease, bird flu, pig disease, swine flu, and other meat-related diseases. We also have other human causes, like the poor families being pushed off their land for cattle production, the adults and children of the world who are perishing due to hunger, the grief and sorrow of the families who lost loved ones due to meat-related diseases, etc., etc. As for the bigger picture of how much meat eating is costing our planet, the cows in such unnaturally huge numbers, more than 1 billion on the planet, are responsible for more than 50% or even far more of total greenhouse emissions on the earth. Nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more potent than CO2, is being emitted in vast quantities from the fertilizers required to produce the food crops for the cattle. The livestock industry produces at least 67% of all the world's nitrous oxide emissions. So, a hamburger, as you can see, is clearly unaffordable, not only in global warming, but also in deforestation, soil erosion, and desertification, water shortage, water pollution, loss of biodiversity, not to mention the negative health and bad karmic consequence prices we also have to pay, and loss of lives, precious lives. I think you're correct that reducing meat production by 50% is a very underestimate, in part because we have waited so long to change. So our time has become too short, in fact, and the situation is too dire. Just in case you are not aware, or maybe others viewers are not, I will share with you some of the facts of where we are today. With melting that has caused the biggest ice loss ever known in the Arctic, scientists now tell us that the region is warming at a rate twice as fast as the rest of the world. As you may already know, 2 German ships has just traveled through the Northeast Passage because the ice all melted, and that is the first time in known human history that the ships could pass through. So the vast ice beneath Greenland is also melting, even faster than previously predicted. Many researchers are saying that at the rate of current warming, there is almost no way for our world to stay within the limits of a 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise, which is the maximum that will still ensure the safety of most life on the planet. But even though our predicament is very grave, we do still have time if we act now. And the solution is still very simple. Well, you know it, right? It's the vegan diet. No animal products. No more killing, no more torturing, no more even experimenting with animals. No more raising animals for meat or any other purposes, except to protect, love, and take care of the animals. This is the key. If everyone switches to this beneficial lifestyle, our planet will be cooled in no time, scientifically speaking, and my promise. One reason for this is that the main contributing gas from livestock, which is methane, traps 72 times more heat than CO2 over a 20-year period. And then there is the other gases, nitrous oxide, for example, which comes from the unregulated waste contamination and fertilizer runoff of crops that are primarily grown for livestock to consume. This gas trapped 289 times more heat than CO2, more than carbon dioxide. According to the most recent figures from scientists, livestock raising is actually responsible for more than 50% of global warming. More than 50% is coming from meat and dairy production. Imagine that. So with 55 billion animals currently being murdered every year for meat consumption, you can imagine how much the earth would be restored if this is stopped. The original United Nations report in 2006, Livestock Long Shadow, spoke in bold terms even already about the damage caused by the livestock industry, saying that it is one of the top most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems at every scale, from local to global. Furthermore, I would mention a few of the problems the United Nations and others have noted are coming from livestock raising and meat consumption. First, depleted land and forest. According to the United Nations, livestock is the main reason for deforestation and the loss of our vital trees, which in turn is causing tragic declines in natural biodiversity. Livestock raising is also among the top factors in degrading our lands through soil erosion and pollution, as well as climate change. Second, wasted resources. For every kilogram of animal protein produced, livestock are fed about 6 kilograms of plant protein. The U.S. livestock population currently consumes more than 7 times as much grain as the entire American population. Third, wasted water. With current droughts and water shortages already affecting millions and only expected to get worse and worse, scientists have found that each person eating a meat and dairy-based diet uses around 4,500 gallons of water per day, compared to 300 gallons per day for a vegan diet. This also means that 1 pound of animal protein requires 100 times more water to produce than 1 pound of grain protein. Over the course of a year, the vegan diet saves approximately 1.5 million gallons of water per person. Fourth, wasted energy. Now, the artificial indoor environment of the factory farm and slaughterhouse use massive amounts of energy. In fact, it takes 8 times as much fossil fuel to produce animal products as to produce plant food. Fifth, environmental contamination. The United Nations has also recognized livestock as inflicting some of the biggest damage to our dwindling water supplies. Just to give you an idea of the scale, one dairy farm alone with 2,500 cows produces as much solid waste as a city with over 400,000 residents. This waste, which sometimes contains bacterial contaminants such as E. coli, ends up in waterways that affect drinking water and aquatic life. Along with the waste are chemical fertilizers runoff used on crops fed to animals, which have been documented by scientists to cause dead zones in the ocean as well as toxic algae outbreak. You know those green moss that grow in the water. One such event just occurred in Brittany, France, where a majority of the country's livestock and a third of the dairy farms are located. On the Brittany coast, this waste and chemical runoff coming into the sea causes outbreaks of toxic algae, which emit the lethal, deadly gas hydrogen sulfide. So recently in the news, we heard of a horse that died within half a minute of stepping into the algae. And now the health concerns of over 300 people are being investigated for the same reason around that area. Making all of this worse is the fact that animal waste is largely unregulated, meaning that there is nothing to stop these events of contamination that can cause illnesses or even death for massive numbers of animals and people. Just talking about financial saving alone, scientists in the Netherlands found that of the estimated 40 trillion needed to stop global warming, a full 80% of this amount would be saved with a vegan diet. That's a saving of 32 trillion for the simple step of turning away from the meat to eating plant-based goods. According to a recent announcement by the United Nations, the number of people going hungry across the world has now officially exceeded 1 billion. This is due in part to the steeply rising food costs that are part of our global economic crisis. However, this is directly related to meat consumption. Because if all the grains fed to livestock animals were grown for human consumption instead, then the amounts of food harvested for humans would be higher and prices lower. Logically, no? Moreover, the global warming caused by livestock has resulted in many instances of documented extreme weather and drought, leading to devastating crop losses and also drive food prices sky high. So if everyone turns to the plant-based diet, we have more food immediately and an easing of conditions like drought and flooding, with abundant harvest and food supplies quickly restored. In fact, the head of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Mr. Yves de Boer, already stated in June 2008 that the best solution would be for us all to become vegetarians. He meant vegans. Because vegetarians mean people still eat milk and related dairy products. That means we still have to keep a large amount, maybe less large, but still a large amount of cattle. And that will contribute to global warming and further food crisis and security. You mentioned also the moral crisis of our world and wonder if there is any connection to our food choices. You can guess the answer to that, right? Yes, there is, sir, there is. This is the other reason we must become vegan. We have to stop the cruelty, the inhumane and below human standard treatment of all the animals that come here to bless our world with their uniqueness and love. I mentioned before that 55 billion animals are murdered every year, legally, for consumption. This is not even counting the billions of fish. Can we imagine? There is no bigger moral crisis than the one that is created by the massacring of sweet, innocent living beings for our pleasure, when we have other choices. Such mass murder is a crime of global proportions, and this killing energy, in turn, breeds and strengthens other negative energy, which is degrading our society and destroying our world. So, to return ourselves and our world to a more pure state, one where all beings can feel safe, protected, and loved, and where all humans walk the dignified way of the children of God. We have to stop the killing of innocent animals. Stop it now. Stop it now. And turn to the merciful way of life, the natural way of life that God intended us to live, which is the vegan diet. This will restore the conscience of every person who adopts such a lifestyle, as well as the planet itself. If the conscience is clear, we have no more moral crisis. So, we have peace, we have harmony, we will have abundance. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization reported that livestock raising is the single largest human use of land, the biggest source of water pollution, the number one cause of biodiversity loss, and the top producer of human-caused methane and nitrous oxide. In fact, the United Nations has named livestock as one of the biggest environmental problems of our time. With 90% of the destruction to the Amazon rainforest since 1970, being for cattle and growing animal feed. Lush forests are being turned into barren fields at a rate of 36 football fields per minute. 36 football fields per minute of rainforests are being destroyed as we are speaking. If you can imagine how big that is, how detrimental that is to our world. Rainforest is the lung of our planet. It's the health of our co-citizens. And as the trees are felled and plants become more exposed and dry, they even emit carbon dioxide rather than absorb it. This is another danger that attacking us. Being veg is beneficial for any kind of spiritual advancement. In fact, all the wise ancient teachings of sages since time immemorial have highlighted the importance of a benevolent plant-based diet. It is a fundamental requirement of a spiritual practitioner. The concept behind foregoing animal products is ahimsa, meaning nonviolence. By partaking of a vegan diet, we also avoid the bad retribution of killing, and thus it will not burden and obstruct our spiritual journey. I'm sure you are familiar with this principle, Señorita Brasesco. In your work to save and protect the animals, being vegan simply means that we protect all the animals. This killing of other beings must be stopped for humanity to evolve as a civilization. The benefits of doing so are manifold. Besides restoration of health, biodiversity will be allowed to thrive, planet equilibrium restored, along with the easing of our own conscience and our capacity for elevated consciousness. All these are the fruits of a more compassionate diet. This loving attitude also creates a more peaceful atmosphere that brings greater comfort to all beings, at peace with ourselves in the knowledge that we did not cause anguish or pain to our fellow animals, our brethren. We will have the inner tranquility to pursue our spiritual endeavors wholeheartedly. Before we expect the lion to lay down peacefully with the lamb, we humans must do it first. As long as the humans cannot even lay down peacefully with the lamb, causing all the anguish, fear, sorrow, oppression to weaker beings and defenseless animals, we cannot realize this heavenly dream, as the lion will lie beside the lamb. So, we must return to our compassionate self. We must return to our glorious status as the children of God. We have to bring heaven to earth.
"視聴者の皆様、本日はマスターと弟子の地球の生物多様性を回復する最善の方法、スプリームマサチンハイの討議からの抜粋、全2回の後編にお付き合いいただきありがとうございました。